They called it the harshest winter the territory had seen in a decade. The dusty trails turned to mud, the winds howled through the night, and desperate souls roamed the high plains in search of second chances. Right there on the outskirts of Dry Gulch, Jacob Rhodes, a grieving widower trying to keep his ranch afloat, stumbled upon a young woman dressed in tattered rags. She lay by the road, her face caked with dust and tears, clutching only a small pouch of secrets to her chest. In a single moment of pity and faith, Jacob married her on the Jacob Rhodes was no stranger to heartbreak. He'd buried his wife Caroline 2 years earlier after a sudden outbreak of cholera that had swept through the town of Dry Gulch. Folks whispered that her passing had drained the color from Jacob's world. He'd become quieter, preferring the crackle of a lone lantern in his ranch house to the bustle of the saloon. Yet life in the Arizona Territory demanded relentless toil. His small piece of land, nestled near the edge of a rugged canyon, refused to yield anything of value, except for a modest corral and a few cattle too stubborn to die. Working from dawn till dusk, Jacob had grown lean and sun-worn. His once boyish face had turned gaunt lines of worry etched around his pale blue eyes. He still wrote letters to Caroline in his spare time, letters he could never send. They stayed in a drawer near the bed, a silent testament to his ongoing grief. The dryness of the land mirrored the dryness in his heart, and it was rumored around town that he was just waiting, holding on to life until something or someone would give him a reason to feel again. Jacob's older friend, Sheriff James Donovan, worried that the rancher's sorrow might lead him down a darker path. James would ride out every now and then to check on Jacob, tipping his broad-brimmed hat in greeting. He'd usually carry a bottle of whiskey, the best he could afford, on a lawman's pay. They would exchange a few words, acknowledging that grief had become Jacob's silent partner. "You know it ain't healthy," Donovan said one Sunday afternoon. "This land is as rough as any, and you need someone to help you keep on living." Jacob would just shrug. "Caroline ain't coming back. That's all there is to it, James." Despite his sorrow, Jacob was a man of integrity, never turning away a drifter needing a meal or a traveler needing a place to rest. It was on one of those storm-worn evenings at the tail end of winter that his entire fate changed. It was near sunset as Jacob rode his buckskin mare Daisy along the lonesome path from Dry Gulch back to his ranch. The wind whipped at his coat, carrying a cold edge left over from the recent storms. The tumbleweeds skittered across the road, and dark clouds loomed overhead. Sleet rattled in the distance. Halfway home, Daisy jerked her head to the side, ears pricked forward. Jacob squinted against the dying light and saw what looked like a small, crumpled figure lying by a large boulder. He dismounted his boots, sinking into the damp earth. There, half covered in a torn blanket, lay a woman who couldn't have been more than 20 or so. Her hair was matted with mud, and her dress, little more than ragged cloth, was ripped and dirty. At first glance, Jacob thought she might be dead. He knelt beside her, pressing 2 fingers gently to her neck. A faint pulse fluttered beneath his fingertips. Her eyes remained closed, but her lips parted slightly, as though attempting to speak. Without hesitation, he scooped her into his arms. She was as light as a sack of grain, trembling from fever or cold or both. The woman stirred. Her eyelids flickered open, revealing a pair of wide brown eyes filled with terror. She tried to speak, but only a raspy whisper emerged. Jacob grabbed the canteen from his saddlebag, tilting it to her lips. She gulped the water with desperation, coughing violently after a few sips. Easy, he murmured. Easy now, as if she couldn't believe someone was helping her. The woman's mouth opened to form the words, "Thank you," though hardly a sound escaped. Then her gaze fell back to the ground. With a determined set to his jaw, Herr Jacob lifted her onto Daisy. He steadied her in front of him, riding slow to keep her from falling off. The entire journey to the ranch he prayed under his breath that she would keep breathing until he could get her warm. Thunder rattled overhead as Jacob guided Daisy into the barn. Lightning cracked across the sky, illuminating the ranch house, a simple one-story wooden structure hammered together from local timber and faith. He carried the woman inside, lit the lantern, and laid her on his small bed. Rummaging through his supplies, he found some spare blankets, a pair of old trousers, and a threadbare shirt that had once belonged to Caroline. Swiftly, he stoked the fireplace, placing another log to drive away the cold. The woman's face was pale, her cheekbones sticking out sharply. She'd lost consciousness again, so Jacob took a basin of warm water and gently cleaned the caked dirt from her face and arms. He noticed bruises on her wrists and ankles, hints of some past violence. His chest tightened with empathy and anger. 2 hours passed. The wind still howled, but inside the modest ranch house warmth gradually returned. At last the woman stirred, coughing and opening her eyes. She stared at the flickering flames, at Jacob's silent figure in the chair beside her, and tried to speak. "Easy," he said again, offering her some more water. This time she drank without coughing. A faint blush colored her cheeks as she realized her disheveled state. Who are you?" she managed to whisper. "Jacob Rhodes," he replied. "I found you by the roadside." She looked around, pulling the blanket tighter. I don't know how I got there." Jacob's eyes narrowed. "Those bruises on your wrists. Someone hurt you?" She hesitated, tears pooling in her eyes. Eventually she nodded. "I can't go back," she breathed, her voice like fragile glass. "He'll kill me." Jacob swallowed hard, remembering how he'd lost Caroline to an illness that paid no heed to love or goodness. Now a battered soul was here right in front of him. Although he was no lawman like Donovan, something in him raged at the thought of letting any harm befall her again. "You're safe here," he said, though the words felt insufficient. The woman continued trembling. It took a few more tries before she could speak above a whisper. "My name is Emma." She trailed off, uncertain whether to trust him fully with her surname. Jacob nodded. "Emma. That's a good name." They sat in silence, the fire's glow dancing over their faces. Jacob realized what it would mean if someone was after her, especially in a place as lawless as the Arizona Territory. He also knew how rumors spread around Dry Gulch. "What are you going to do?" Emma asked, voice wavering. A knot formed in Jacob's throat. He didn't have a definitive plan. But he did have an idea, reckless, impulsive, but perhaps the only way to keep her truly safe from prying eyes and legal complications. In that moment, an image of his late wife crossed his mind. He imagined Caroline's gentle spirit urging him forward. "I'll marry you," he said, voice low but firm. Emma stared at him, as though he'd just suggested she sprout wings and fly. "But we just met." He managed a rueful smile. "I know it sounds crazier than a buffalo at a tea party, but a wife can't be forced to testify against her husband. And folks in Dry Gulch might respect that bond enough to leave you in peace. It'll give you my name, my home, and some measure of protection." Emma's eyes brimmed with uncertainty, but also a glimmer of hope. She had nothing. No possessions, no place to go, and someone out there who wanted her dead. After a moment, she pressed her lips together and nodded. Jacob's own heart pounded almost as if part of him couldn't believe the words that had just left his mouth. The next morning, the storm had passed, leaving muddy roads and a crisp chill in the air. Jacob's ranch was a good ride from town, but in that corner of the frontier, there weren't many official processes for marriage. Most folk accepted the word of the local preacher, or if no preacher was available, the simple vow-taking in front of a witness. Sheriff James Donovan arrived to check on Jacob that afternoon, expecting his usual stoic friend. Instead, he found a visibly shaken woman in borrowed clothes warming her hands by the fire, and Jacob pacing across the living room. After explaining the situation as much as Emma could manage without giving away her full story, Donovan rubbed a hand over his stubble. "You sure about this?" he asked Jacob. Brows furrowed with concern. Jacob nodded. "If we wait too long, whoever did this to her might catch wind she's here. Besides, we can't have folks telling stories that she's just shacked up with me. This is the best way, James." Donovan sighed and set his hat on the table. "All right, we can hold a simple ceremony. I'm not a preacher, but in these parts, my word's as good as any official. Let's gather 2 more witnesses to make it binding." Jacob quickly fetched Carl Everett, a reliable ranch hand, who sometimes worked for him, and an old woman named Millie Porter, who sold homemade pies in town. They arrived in a rusted wagon, looking both surprised and curious. With the fireplace crackling and the meager morning light filtering through the window, Donovan cleared his throat. Emma stood trembling in the same borrowed shirt and skirt. The woman in rags, indeed. Her eyes darted nervously around the cabin. Jacob tried to calm her with a reassuring smile, but his own heart hammered. He recalled the softness of Caroline's eyes on their wedding day, and a pang of guilt struck him for embarking on another union so abruptly. But the resolve to protect Emma remained stronger. "I, Sheriff James Donovan, do solemnly witness the union of Jacob Rhodes and Emma. Well, Emma as husband and wife in the eyes of God and the territory of Arizona," James said. "Do you all promise to stand by each other through good times and bad sickness and health?" Jacob inhaled slowly, looking at Emma. "I do." Emma locked her gaze on him, tears threatening to spill. "I do," she whispered. "Then by the powers vested in me by this territory, I declare you husband and wife," Donovan said. A hint of a smile tugged at his lips. "God help you both." Carl clapped and Millie dabbed at her eyes with her apron. A pang of bittersweet relief washed over Jacob. He was no longer alone, though his heart was divided between Caroline's memory and this woman before him, who needed saving. News travels fast in a small frontier town. By the time Jacob and Emma arrived in Dry Gulch 3 days later, tongues were already wagging. The local saloon owned by a man named Jedediah Wilkes buzzed with conversation. Folks gossiped about how Jacob Rhodes, the widower, who barely ever spoke, took in some bedraggled stranger and married her on sight. Emma clung to Jacob's arm, feeling eyes on her from every direction. Her cheeks burned with self-consciousness, but she tried to keep her chin up. She was still shaky on her feet, recovering from both her physical injuries and the turmoil swirling in her mind. The wooden planks of the dusty boardwalk creaked underfoot as they made their way to Donovan's office. Sheriff Donovan had invited them to talk about Emma's potential legal trouble. He'd done some asking around and discovered no missing persons bulletin that matched Emma's description. That was good news, perhaps. Whoever hurt her wasn't organized enough to put the law on her trail. But there were still rumors, hints of new outlaws drifting through the territory, men without mercy who might come searching. Inside the cramped sheriff's office, wanted posters dotted the walls, some more faded than others. Donovan offered them chairs, then sighed. "I've heard nothing, so maybe you're in the clear. But if trouble comes, you better be ready. Emma, do you remember anything more about who hurt you?" Emma twisted her skirt in her hands, struggling for composure. "It was a man named Roy Gallows," she whispered, voice trembling. I think he works for someone powerful. They told me I couldn't leave, that I had a debt to pay." Jacob's eyes flashed with anger. "A debt for what?" Emma swallowed hard, looking away. "They wanted me to do things Steele, maybe worse." Her gaze fell to the floor. "I refused. Roy used to lock me in a shed when I resisted." Donovan's jaw tightened. "Roy Gallows. You say I've heard that name. He's been hanging around a known trafficker named Conrad Higgs. Higgs is rumored to run gambling dens in Tucson, extorting folks running contraband up and down the territory. I can't say for sure, but that might be who you got mixed up with." An uneasy silence fell. Emma's eyes brimmed with tears she refused to let fall. Jacob reached out to grasp her hand. "You're safe with me," he said gently. Donovan cleared his throat. "For now. But be cautious. These men don't take kindly to losing. If you need a place to hide, or if trouble finds you, come see me immediately." Jacob nodded his thanks. As they rose to leave, Donovan handed Emma a small revolver. "Practice with this," he advised, "in case I'm not around." Emma stared at the weapon with trembling hands. "I've never fired a gun," she admitted. First time for everything Donovan said. "Jacob can show you. Don't be afraid to protect yourself." Outside, the midday sun beat down mercilessly. Jacob guided Emma toward the general store so she could buy some proper clothing. Passing by the saloon, a hush fell over the crowd. Emma could feel their stares, but she resolved not to let them shame her. She was by law now, Mrs. Emma Rhodes. That reality still felt surreal, but it was a precious shield in this dangerous land. Back at the ranch, the days assumed a new rhythm. Emma tried to make herself useful cooking meals and tending to the small vegetable patch behind the house, while Jacob toiled in the fields and with the cattle. She'd wake early to fetch water from the well, her hands no longer soft and idle, but calloused and strong. Each evening, Emma would practice shooting the revolver behind the barn, aiming at a half-rotten fence post. Her hands shook at first, the recoil nearly knocking her off balance. Jacob stood close, offering tips. "Bend your arms slightly. Keep your shoulders squared." Gradually, her shots found their mark more often than not. In turn, Jacob found solace in Emma's presence. Though it was a marriage of convenience, her laughter and gentle conversation began to thaw the frozen chambers of his heart. He'd show her how to milk the goat, gather eggs from the few chickens that roamed the yard, and repair the roof before the next storm. During these tasks, their eyes would meet, and an unspoken bond formed, one that felt both comforting and frightening at the same time. On Sundays, they'd ride into town for supplies, always vigilant for signs of Roy Gallows or any suspicious strangers. Sheriff Donovan kept a watchful eye as well, but so far there was no sign that Emma's tormentor had tracked her to Dry Gulch. Despite the relative peace, not everyone was welcoming. Cecilia Mallory, who ran the boarding house, sneered whenever Emma passed by, married that poor widower in a hush-hush ceremony. "She must be after his land," Cecilia would mutter to her boarders. Carl Everett, however, supported them wholeheartedly. "Don't pay attention to old Cecilia. he told Emma once, tipping his hat. "She's just sour because no one's proposed to her in a decade. You and Mr. Rhodes got every right to make your own way." Jacob found himself smiling more often, even though the memory of Caroline lingered. Late at night, he'd stare at his reflection in the small mirror on the wall, wondering if this was betrayal or if Caroline would understand. Eventually, he realized that love could exist in more than one form. Emma needed him, and in truth, he needed her. The quiet weeks ended one afternoon, when Jacob returned from town with a grim face. He found Emma hunched over in the garden, carefully weeding around the carrots. Her hair, now washed and brushed, was tied back with a kerchief. She looked up to see Jacob's expression and went still. "What's wrong?" she asked, her heartbeat kicking up a notch. Jacob cleared his throat. Donovan got word. A stranger's been asking around about a young woman with brown eyes and a scar on her left wrist. Emma's eyes widened. She instinctively pulled back her sleeve to glance at the faint scar near her wrist bone, a souvenir from Roy's cruelty. "Are you sure it's him?" Jacob nodded. Donovan said, "The man goes by Luther Easton, one of Roy Gallows' cronies. You need to stay close to the ranch, maybe keep the door locked when I'm out." She rose to her feet, the garden hoe slipping from her fingers. "I can fight," she said, voice shaking with a mix of fear and determination. "You've taught me to shoot." Jacob placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "I know you can, but I'd rather not put you in harm's way." Emma forced a smile, though her mind reeled with anxiety. The ranch, once a haven, now felt vulnerable. She wondered how long they could hold out if these men decided to come for her. That evening they barred the doors and shuttered the windows. Jacob kept his rifle close by, and Emma kept the revolver under her pillow. They listened to every rustle of the wind and the distant calls of coyotes. If Roy Gallows or Luther Easton came, they would be ready. Or so they hoped. The next morning, a lone rider appeared on the horizon. Jacob spotted the silhouette from a distance, a black figure against the golden stretch of plains. As the rider approached, Jacob recognized him as an old friend, turned rival Billy Taggart. Billy had once been part of a posse with Sheriff Donovan, but he'd developed a taste for easy money and run-ins with the law. Billy reined in his horse near the front porch, boots coated in dust. He tipped his hat eyes, scanning the property. "Heard you got hitched, Jacob." Billy drawled, a mocking grin curling his lip. "Town's talking about the fancy new bride you picked up off the roadside." Jacob's jaw clenched. He stepped forward, rifle angled across his arm. "You got business here, Billy?" Billy shrugged lazily. "I got word that some men are looking for a certain woman. They're willing to pay a good sum for any information. Thought I'd come see if you might know anything about that." Before Jacob could reply, Emma stepped onto the porch, stiff but resolute. "I'm his wife," she said. Her expression hardened. "And we have nothing to say." Billy's sly gaze flickered over her. "Is that so?" "Well, these folks say she's a runaway, dangerous a thief. You sure you want to protect her?" "Jacob." Jacob's hands tightened on the rifle. "Get off my land, Billy." Billy spat into the dust, shaking his head, as if disappointed. "Have it your way. But they'll be coming. And those men ain't as soft-hearted as me." He turned his horse and rode away, the rumble of hooves fading into the distance. Emma wrapped her arms around herself, shivering despite the hot sun. "It's starting," she whispered, tears threatening to spill. Jacob pulled her close. "We knew it might. But we'll face it together." Fearing the worst, Jacob and Emma packed some supplies ready to flee if necessary. Sheriff Donovan stopped by that evening with news that Roy Gallows had been spotted near a watering hole a few miles east of town. "He'll likely come here within the next day or two," Donovan warned. "The man's mean as a cornered rattler." Emma squared her shoulders. "I won't run this time," she said, surprising both Donovan and Jacob with the steel in her voice. "I can't live my life in fear." Donovan nodded. "I respect that. But you should know something else. There's talk that Roy's working directly under Conrad Higgs. If that's true, you might face an entire gang, not just one man." Emma took a shaky breath. "If I run, they'll chase me forever. I'd rather stand my ground here." Jacob admired her courage. He placed a gentle hand on her back. "We'll stand together." Donovan surveyed the ranch's surroundings. "You got any friends who can help you defend this place?" Jacob paused. He thought of Carl Everett. He might be willing to help. And there was the traveling preacher Reverend Bowman, who sometimes stayed with folks in need. Also, a local gunsmith, Harold Pritchard, owed Jacob a favor for helping him out last winter. Within hours, a small band of allies assembled at the ranch. Carl arrived with an old shotgun, determined to do anything for the man who'd once saved his crops from locusts. Harold brought extra firearms and ammunition. Millie Porter, older but feisty, showed up with a satchel of bandages and her unwavering spirit. "I ain't about to let no miscreant scare off a sweet girl," she declared. They set up watch in shifts, each person taking a spot around the perimeter. Emma was stationed on the porch rifle, resting across a wooden rail. Anxiety churned in her gut, but also a sense of resolve. She'd been abused, humiliated, left for dead. Now she had a chance to reclaim her dignity. As they waited, the sun cast long shadows across the yard, and the hush of dusk settled over the ranch. Out on the horizon, thunderheads loomed. Another storm was brewing. Night descended slowly, the sky turning a bruised shade of purple. Jacob and Emma shared a tense meal with their makeshift posse. Conversation was sparse, every ear attuned to the slightest sound. Then, just as the moon slipped behind a cloud, the distant thunder of hooves reached their ears. Carl hissed a warning from his vantage point near the barn. Donovan readied his rifle, gesturing for everyone to keep their positions. Emma took a deep breath, knuckles whitening around her revolver. A group of riders materialized from the darkness. 5 men, led by a tall figure with a scar running down the left side of his face. Roy Gallows. He halted his horse near the front gate, his men fanning out behind him. "We've come for the girl," he announced, voice carrying in the still night. "Hand her over, and we'll leave you be." Jacob stepped forward, his own rifle trained on Roy. "You're trespassing, Roy. Turn around before this gets ugly." Roy let out a laugh, dry and humorless. "You got spunk roads, but you're outnumbered. We want what's ours." Emma emerged from behind Jacob, leveling her gun at Roy. "I'm not yours, Roy," she said, trembling but defiant. "I never was." Roy's eyes gleamed with malice. "That's where you're wrong. You owe a debt. Conrad Higgs don't forgive debts easy." Jacob's voice rang out. "Emma is under my protection. You want her, you'll have to go through me and the rest of us." For a heartbeat, the night was still. Then Roy signaled to his men, and the air erupted in a flurry of gunshots. Bullets whizzed past, splintering porch rails and kicking up dust. Emma dove behind a barrel, firing back with shaky aim. Donovan crouched by the wagon, returning fire in short bursts. Carl's shotgun thundered, forcing two of Roy's men to retreat behind their horses. A muzzle flash lit Roy's face, twisted with anger. He aimed directly at Jacob, who managed to duck behind the water trough just in time. Jacob's hat flew off a bullet hole, punched clean through it. Emma clenched her jaw, peering around the barrel. She saw Roy reload. This was her moment. She squeezed the trigger, the recoil jolting her, but the shot found its target, Roy's side. He let out a roar of pain, slumping in the saddle, before toppling to the ground. Shouting erupted among Roy's men. One fired haphazardly at Emma's position, splintering the barrel. She scrambled to keep herself covered, heart pounding. Another shot rang out from Carl's shotgun, and one of Roy's men crumpled to the dirt. With their leader down and 2 men wounded, the remaining outlaws cursed and retreated, dragging Roy's limp form onto a horse. Hooves thundered away into the night, leaving behind the stench of gunpowder and the echo of frantic breathing. In the stillness that followed, Emma emerged cautiously, revolver shaking in her hand. Jacob rushed over, scanning her for injuries. She shook her head, tears of shock streaming down her cheeks. Donovan lit a lantern to assess the damage. The porch was riddled with bullet holes, the water trough shattered, and the barn door peppered with splinters. Miraculously, none of Jacob's group was seriously injured. Carl had a grazing wound on his arm, which Millie bandaged quickly. Emma trembled as she stared at the spot where Roy had fallen. The reality of having shot a man, even one who'd tormented her, churned in her stomach. Jacob gently pried the revolver from her grip. "You saved my life," he said, softly, wiping a tear from her cheek. She swallowed hard, nodding. Her knees threatened to buckle, and Jacob supported her weight as he guided her back inside. They spent the rest of the night tending to the wounded and repairing what they could. Sleep was fitful, haunted by the memory of gunfire. Yet through the nightmare, Emma felt a sense of liberation. She'd stood up for herself. She'd fought back. When morning arrived, the group gathered in the kitchen, exhaustion etched on their faces. Donovan broke the tense silence. "We made it through, but Roy Gallows ain't likely to forget this. He'll bring more men next time, or Conrad Higgs might come himself." Emma inhaled sharply. "So, we have to run?" Jacob gazed at her. "We might have to. But if we do, we'll have a plan. I'm not leaving this land without a fight." Donovan set down his coffee mug. "I sent a telegram last night to an old friend, Patrick Garrett. You might have heard of him. He's dealt with some of the deadliest men on the frontier. He's passing through the territory soon. If we're lucky, he could help. But for now, keep your guard up." They all agreed to stay vigilant. Once the immediate crisis had passed, Carl and Millie returned to their own homes, promising to return at a moment's notice if trouble struck again. Days passed without further sign of Roy or his men. Emma found herself torn between relief and dread. Surely Roy was plotting revenge, but how and when? Meanwhile, a new tension simmered between her and Jacob. Their marriage had been born of necessity, but it had grown into something more. They danced around each other carefully, unsure how to define their bond in this precarious time. One dawn, Emma woke early and found Jacob outside, watching the sun rise over the rugged hills. She joined him, arms wrapped around herself for warmth. "You okay?" she asked softly. He glanced at her, then turned back to the horizon. "Just thinking, every day I miss Caroline. But with you here, the ache feels different. Lighter sometimes." He paused. "I don't want you to think I'm using you as some replacement." Emma's eyes brimmed with empathy. I'd never think that. Caroline was special to you. I can't replace her, nor do I want to. She hesitated, tears catching in her throat. I'm grateful for your kindness, for what you risked to protect me. And I care for you. Jacob smiled, a softness lighting his features. For a moment, words failed him. Instead, he wrapped his arm around Emma's shoulders, pulling her close. The horizon glowed with the promise of a new day. And for just that moment, the looming threats faded, replaced by something tender and hopeful. It was late afternoon, when Emma remembered the small pouch she'd been clutching when Jacob found her by the roadside. In the chaos and exhaustion of recovery, she'd stashed it in a drawer and all but forgotten about it. While tidying the house, she stumbled upon it again, a worn leather pouch tied shut with a fraying string. She slipped into the bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed, heart pounding. It felt like opening a relic of her old life. Inside, she discovered a letter and a single pendant made of polished turquoise set in silver. The letter was crumpled, some words smeared by tears or the elements but still legible. Dear Emma, I know this has been a terrible burden, but your father wanted you to have this. It's the only thing left from your mother's family. He feared Conrad Higgs might take it from you to pay debts, so you must keep it hidden at all costs. Trust no one, child. When you are safe, find a man named Wyatt Earp in Dodge City. He might help you once you get out of this territory. Signed, Virginia Dare. Emma's mind spun. She hadn't read the letter carefully before she'd been too traumatized to process it. Her father, before his passing, must have known the danger of the debts he owed. Higgs was always circling them like a vulture demanding money they didn't have. The turquoise pendant must be a family heirloom, possibly worth a small fortune. That would explain why Roy wanted her. She had something valuable to him, even if she hadn't known its worth. She clutched the pendant in her palm, tears welling. Memories flooded back her father, coughing in his final days, the meager meals they shared, the desperation that had led him to borrow money from Higgs's operation. She'd never known Wyatt Earp personally, only the stories of how he upheld the law in certain parts. Maybe if she could find Earp, she could break free from Higgs' looming shadow. But to do so meant leaving the only safe place she'd ever known, Jacob's ranch. Could she ask him to uproot his life for her? Anxiety and gratitude warred in her chest as she contemplated the path ahead. That evening, Emma showed Jacob the pouch and the letter. His eyes narrowed as he read it. So Higgs wants that pendant, he murmured, turning the turquoise over in his hand. And maybe more. Emma nodded. It must be valuable enough that he sent Roy after me. My father owed them money, but the letter suggests there's more to this pendant. Jacob placed it back in the pouch carefully. We can't just hand it over. But if Higgs is after it, he won't stop. Emma swallowed, twisting her hands. The letter says to go to Dodge City and find Wyatt Earp. That's a long journey north, and I'd hate to drag you into more danger. Jacob's gaze softened. You're my wife, Emma. Where you go, I go. Besides, this ranch might not be safe if Higgs decides to send a small army. It might be time to start over, somewhere else. Tears of relief glistened in Emma's eyes. She threw her arms around him in a fierce hug, her gratitude spilling over. I don't know how I'll ever repay you, she whispered. Jacob held her close. You already have. They spent the next day preparing for a possible journey. Donovan, upon hearing their plan, reluctantly agreed it might be the best course. If you stay, Higgs will eventually come with more men than we can handle, he warned. If you leave, maybe you'll find real protection. Carl, Millie, and Harold came by to offer supplies and bid them farewell. You come back someday, you hear? Millie insisted, pressing a loaf of bread into Emma's hands. Emma promised they would, if fate allowed. Jacob and Emma departed at dawn, leading a small wagon loaded with provisions, blankets, and their sparse belongings. The ranch's weathered boards and dusty corral disappeared behind them, replaced by the sweeping vista of the open plains. They felt the weight of sadness leaving the home Jacob had built with Caroline, but also the surge of hope for a safer life. The road to Dodge City was no gentle trail. They passed through dry gulches, rocky passes, and wind-scorched flatlands. Sometimes they encountered travelers' wagon trains heading west, prospectors hoping to strike gold families, fleeing misfortune. At night, they camped under the stars with Jacob taking the first watch, while Emma dozed fitfully. A week into their journey, they reached a small settlement near the border with New Mexico. Rumors drifted through the local saloon that a gang was scouring the region, asking about a woman named Emma Rhodes. Jacob and Emma exchanged worried looks and quickly moved on. Each new settlement brought the same question. Have you seen this woman? They learned that Roy Gallows, although wounded, was still alive. He and his men carried sketches of Emma's face and descriptions of Jacob. The net was tightening. 2 weeks in, they found themselves at a narrow canyon pass. The red rock walls loomed like silent sentinels, casting long shadows across the trail. Emma shivered, despite the heat, an inexplicable sense of foreboding gnawing at her gut. Jacob's eyes scanned the ridges. This place is too quiet, he muttered. Stay alert. They rode slowly, the wagon wheels crunching over loose gravel. Suddenly, a shot echoed from above. Jacob yanked on the reins, and Emma ducked as a bullet ricocheted off a boulder. Outlaws lined the ridge, Roy Gallows among them, pale but alive, grinning like a viper who'd cornered its prey. Thought you could outrun me? Roy shouted down, voice echoing off the canyon walls. Hand over the girl and the pendant Rhodes, and maybe I'll spare you. Jacob's heart thundered. You know damn well I ain't giving her up. Emma peered around the wagon, fear spiking through her veins. Roy looked battered and bandaged, but his eyes burned with a lust for vengeance. Several armed men flanked him, rifles at the ready. You can't fight us all, Roy taunted. You got nowhere to run. Jacob leveled his rifle, aiming at Roy. We'll see. A fierce firefight erupted, bullets ricocheting off canyon walls. The wagon provided scant cover. Emma clenched her revolver in a white-knuckled grip, returning fire when she could. The horses whinnied in panic, threatening to bolt. Jacob managed to wound one of Roy's men, who tumbled down the rocky slope. But there were too many. A bullet grazed Jacob's arm, drawing blood. Emma cried out, scrambling to tear a strip of cloth for a makeshift bandage. Roy barked an order, and 2 men descended a narrow footpath, circling to flank them. They had no escape route, no way to outrun an ambush from above. Emma glanced at the battered wagon. One idea formed in her mind, wild and desperate. She crawled to the back, rummaging through the supplies, and found a small keg of gunpowder they'd brought along for emergencies. Her hands trembled as she pried the lid open. Jacob, she called out over the roar of gunfire. Cover me! Jacob tried to suppress his alarm, firing furiously to keep Roy's men from advancing. Emma yanked the keg from the wagon, took a deep breath, and lit a piece of rag from the lantern flame. She stuffed the makeshift fuse into the keg, then hurled it toward the rocky incline where 2 outlaws were descending. Get down! Jacob shouted, diving behind a boulder. The explosion rocked the canyon, sending a plume of dust and shattered stone into the air. Roy's men screamed, ducking for cover. Rocks rained down, kicking up a choking cloud of debris. In the chaos, Jacob seized the opportunity. He grabbed Emma's hand and sprinted behind the wagon, coaxing the terrified horses forward. The animals, startled by the blast, bolted up the narrow pass. Emma clung to the wagon seat, her heart pounding. Behind them, Roy cursed and fired blindly, but the dust cloud shielded them. They tore through the pass at a breakneck pace, the horses galloping wildly. Jacob reined them just enough to keep control. Once they cleared the canyon, they didn't stop until sunset. Only then, they slid off the wagon, collapsing in exhaustion on the sandy ground. That night, their small campfire flickered in the desert wind. Emma dressed Jacob's wound properly, her hands trembling with lingering adrenaline. "You were incredible," Jacob said, softly, wincing as she tightened the bandage. "That explosion saved our lives." Emma managed a small, shaky smile. "I thought we were finished back there." He gently cupped her cheek. "Maybe we should backtrack south, find a safer route to Dodge City." She bit her lip. "But what if Roy's men have spread out? Time is precious. We don't know how close behind they'll be." Jacob sighed. "Then we press on." A weight settled between them, the knowledge that they were living on borrowed time until the next attack. And yet something else blossomed in that tension, a deep affection forged in the fires of adversity. In a rare, quiet moment, Emma leaned her head against Jacob's shoulder, staring at the star-laden sky. "Sometimes I wonder if we should have just stayed at the ranch," she murmured. Jacob slipped an arm around her. "We would never have been safe there. This is our path now." She closed her eyes, absorbing the warmth of his presence. "As long as we're together, I'll keep going." Jacob pressed a soft kiss to her temple, his breath feather light against her hair. "Me too," he whispered. A few days later, as they inched closer to Kansas, they heard rumors that Wyatt Earp had indeed arrived in Dodge City. The settlement was a notorious hub of saloons and gambling halls, patrolled by Earp and his deputies with an iron will. If they could just reach him, maybe they'd have a chance. They reached a wide river, crossing the water high from recent storms. Jacob hesitated. "This is where bandits often strike. Keep your eyes peeled." As they prepared to ford the river, the hair on the back of Emma's neck prickled. She turned, expecting to see Roy's men on their tail, but the horizon was mercifully empty. With a prayer under her breath, she urged the horses into the swift current. The wagon lurched and groaned, water lapping at the wheels. Halfway across, the left wheel struck a submerged rock. The wagon tilted dangerously, threatening to tip. Emma cried out, gripping the seat. Jacob jumped into the water, struggling to push the wagon free. He braced his shoulder against it, straining with all his might. For a terrifying moment, Emma thought the wagon would overturn. But with a sharp heave, Jacob freed the wheel. The horses, spooked by the effort, surged forward. Water sloshed over the wagon bed, soaking their belongings. At last they made it to the far bank, dripping and panting. Jacob climbed up water, streaming from his clothes. He grimaced at the soaked supplies. "We lost a few sacks of flour," he noted. "But at least we're alive." Emma exhaled in relief. "Maybe we'll find provisions soon. There should be a trading post a day's ride from here." By the time they reached the outskirts of Dodge City, they were low on food, ammunition, and patience. But seeing the bustling frontier town on the horizon stirred their spirits. This was a place where law and order had at least a fighting chance thanks to men like Wyatt Earp. They entered the dusty streets lined with saloons, hotels, and general stores. Boots clicked on wooden boardwalks, and the jangle of piano music drifted from open windows. A steady flow of cowboys, gamblers, and ranchers went about their business. Emma glanced around warily, scanning for any sign of Roy's men. Jacob guided the wagon toward a modest livery stable where he paid to have the horses fed and the wagon stored. Then they sought out Wyatt Earp, rumored to keep an office near the Long Branch Saloon. They found him inside a small brick building, conferring with a couple of deputies. Wyatt Earp was a tall man, with a mustache as iconic as his reputation. He eyed them appraisingly as they explained their plight. Emma slipped the turquoise pendant from her pocket, showing it to him. "My father said I could trust you. Conrad Higgs has men chasing me for this." Earp studied it carefully. "I've heard rumors about Higgs expanding his reach." "So you want protection?" Jacob squeezed Emma's hand. "We'll do anything necessary to end this. We're tired of running." Earp nodded slowly. "You'll have my support. I can send telegrams to other lawmen, see if we can track Conrad Higgs's whereabouts. In the meantime, you should find a place to lay low. Dodge City might be safer, but it's still full of eyes and ears." Emma exhaled relief washing over her. Finally, they had an ally with real influence. Their sense of relief was short-lived. 3 nights later, as Emma stepped out of the livery stable, she found herself face to face with none other than Roy Gallows, leaning against a post with a sneer. "Evening, Mrs. Rhodes," he drawled quietly, cocking his pistol. "Hand over the pendant and come with me, or I fill you with lead right here." Emma froze. Her heart drummed wildly. She'd left her revolver in the wagon just for a moment. How had Roy tracked them so quickly? From behind her, a new voice cut through the tension. "Not on my watch, Roy." It was Jacob, rifle in hand. Emma dared not move as Roy turned his pistol toward Jacob. "You again," Roy spat. "I owe you a bullet for that stunt at the canyon." Before Roy could pull the trigger, 2 figures emerged from the shadows. Wyatt Earp and one of his deputies' guns drawn. "Lower your weapon," Roy Earp commanded. Roy's gaze flickered, searching for an escape. Realizing he was outgunned, he lunged sideways, firing wildly. Emma dove for cover as bullets whizzed by. Earp and his deputy returned fire. Jacob's rifle roared, but Roy dashed behind a water trough, the bullet missing him by inches. Emma crawled, heart hammering, until her fingers closed around the handle of her revolver inside the wagon. She spun, aiming just as Roy stepped into view. He leveled his pistol at Jacob, who was out in the open, no time to dodge. A surge of adrenaline propelled Emma. She squeezed the trigger. Her shot struck Roy's arm, the impact jerking him sideways. Earp wasted no time. He fired a single shot, hitting Roy in the leg. Roy collapsed, pistol clattering to the ground. Wyatt Earp's deputy rushed in, kicking away Roy's weapon. "He's alive, but not going anywhere fast," the deputy announced. Emma collapsed to her knees, panting and trembling. Jacob rushed to her side, pulling her into an embrace. Wyatt Earp lowered his gun. Eyes narrowed at Roy's groans. "The big question is, where's Conrad?" "Higgs?" Roy coughed, blood seeping through his shirt sleeve and pant leg. "You won't get me to talk," he hissed. Earp gave him a steely look. "Oh, I think the judge might have something to say about that." Over the following days, Earp's deputies interrogated Roy in the local jail. Rumor had it that Roy finally spilled the beans on Conrad Higgs' operation to avoid a long prison sentence or worse. Emma and Jacob learned that Higgs had used fear and intimidation to build his empire, collecting debts from families like Emma's, turning them into forced labor or worse. With Roy's testimony, Earp and other lawmen had enough evidence to track down and dismantle at least part of Higgs' network. The turquoise pendant, it turned out, was a rare heirloom worth a significant sum. Emma decided to keep it as a token of her family's past, rather than sell it. It symbolized both the pain and the resilience that had brought her to Jacob. When Roy was finally transported out of Dodge City, shackled and guarded, Emma felt a weight lift from her soul. No longer did she have to glance over her shoulder every moment, expecting Roy to be there. Wyatt Earp met with them one last time. "You two can head back to your ranch if you like, or start fresh somewhere else. Higgs is on the run, and we'll keep an eye out. You've got no more reason to fear Roy Gallows." Jacob took Emma's hand in his. "We've been talking," he said. "We're going to go back to Arizona, see if we can rebuild the ranch. It's our home." Emma nodded, tears in her eyes. "This time, we can truly make it ours together." Earp smiled, tipping his hat. "You've both been through quite a storm. Best of luck to you." The journey back to Dry Gulch felt strangely liberating. With each turn of the wagon wheels, Emma and Jacob shed another layer of fear and uncertainty. They spoke of their plans for the ranch, maybe expanding the corral, adding a couple of new rooms to the house, planting a bigger garden. They joked about raising more chickens and possibly even trying to breed horses. Sheriff Donovan greeted them with open arms when they arrived. "We heard some of the news Roy Gallows taken down by Earp's men." He beamed. "They say Conrad Higgs is fleeing south, but with the law on his tail, he won't last long." Carl Everett. Millie Porter and Harold Pritchard all came by to welcome them home. The bullet holes from the previous gunfight still scarred the porch, a reminder of the battles fought. But Emma felt no fear standing there now, only gratitude for the place she could finally call home in truth. Over the weeks that followed, Emma and Jacob repaired the ranch house, hammered new boards, and painted the walls a bright, welcoming shade. Emma planted flowers beside the front steps, a splash of color against the dusty plains. Each evening they would sit on the porch together, watching the sun dip below the horizon. Sometimes they spoke of the dangers behind them, the months spent running the violence that had nearly destroyed them both. Other times they simply held hands in comfortable silence, letting the warm desert breeze wash over them. Emma no longer wore tattered rags. She wore simple dresses of sturdy cloth, her hair neatly braided. On her finger sparkled a small silver band, a wedding ring that Jacob had managed to purchase from a traveling jeweler. It wasn't fancy, but to Emma it was more precious than any jewel. As for Jacob, he discovered that his sorrow for Caroline had softened into cherished memory. Caroline was gone, but he felt her blessing in every sunrise he shared with Emma. The two women had never met, but in Jacob's heart they coexisted without conflict, one memory, one reality, each deserving his love. One day, Emma unearthed Caroline's letters while tidying a drawer. She picked them up gently. Tears blurred her vision as she read the heartfelt words Jacob had written to his late wife. Without hesitation, she placed them back in the drawer, her heart swelling with respect for the love that had come before and the love that filled the home now. Time rolled on with each season, bringing its challenges, storms, droughts, stubborn cattle, and the occasional brawl in town. Emma became adept at ranching life, her hands stronger than she ever imagined. She and Jacob still faced life's hardships, but they faced them together, side by side. The turquoise pendant stayed with Emma, a reminder of her journey from a battered runaway to the mistress of her own destiny. Sometimes she thought of her father, wishing he could see how far she'd come. Yet she believed he would be proud. Now, when Emma walked through Dry Gulch, no one dared whisper behind her back about a woman in rags. Instead, they greeted Mrs. Rhodes with friendly smiles, nods, and even invitations to share a meal. Her quiet strength had won their respect, and her story of survival became part of local legend. How a broken woman found by the roadside ended up marrying a lonely widower, only to stand together against the worst outlaws the territory could muster. And so in the wild frontier, where hearts were as untamed as the land itself, Jacob and Emma Rhodes found a rare treasure: hope. Hope born of pain, tested by fire, and sealed with love. Their story was not one of perfect bliss or easy fortune, but of two souls bound by courage and compassion, forging a life in the harsh reality of the Western Plains. They had each other, and in the end, that was enough. Like a wildflower bursting through the dry, cracked earth, Emma and Jacob's story proves that even in life's most unforgiving landscapes, hope can take root. Through gunfights and heartbreak betrayals and moments of transcendent courage, they discovered that true love means standing side by side, even when the odds are stacked against you. From the moment Jacob found Emma in rags by the road to the final sunset that crowned their ranch with the promise of a better tomorrow, their tale shines a light on resilience, sacrifice, and the power of a single act of mercy. If this story captured your heart, please like this video to help others find it. Share it with friends who love tales of frontier romance and thrilling twists. And don't forget to subscribe to this channel for more captivating stories that stir the imagination and celebrate the enduring strength of the human spirit. Your support keeps our stories alive. Thank you for joining us on this epic ride.